Misogynist makes fun of female athlete. Her victory leaves him humiliated. The press conference room is packed. Camera flashes flicker as reporters lean in, eager for a headline. Alex Carter sits at the table, arms crossed, his smirk unwavering. Maya Torres, poised and collected, watches him without flinching. "Let's be honest here," he says, his voice dripping with condescension. "There's ambition, and then there's delusion. We can all appreciate effort, but we can't ignore reality. Women's athletics is great, but it's just not the same level." A murmur spreads through the room. Some reporters exchange knowing glances. Others scribble notes, sensing the controversy brewing. Maya remains still, her hands folded before her, her face unreadable. "You're saying Maya doesn't have a chance?" one reporter asks, his microphone raised. Alex leans forward, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. "I'm saying I've been in this sport for decades. I know talent when I see it, and I also know limits." He pauses for effect, letting the words settle before adding, "If she beats my old record, I'll retire from commentary. That's how confident I am." A collective gasp fills the room. Cameras zoom in, capturing Maya's reaction. She doesn't blink. "I'm not here for your retirement," she says, her voice steady. "I'm here to win." Silence. Then the explosion. Reporters scramble, headlines are already forming in their minds. The internet takes just minutes to catch fire. Alex Carter mocks female athlete, challenges her to beat his record. Can Maya Torres prove him wrong? Social media erupts. At user 1, "He's not wrong. No woman has done it. She's good, but this is reality." At user 2, "He just bet his career on a woman failing. The confidence is unreal." At user 3, "If Maya wins, this will be legendary." Across the city, the gym is nearly empty. The echo of sneakers against the track is the only sound. Sweat drips down her face, but she doesn't stop. The weight of the world is on her shoulders, but she welcomes it. "You don't have to do this," her coach says, watching her push beyond exhaustion. "I do." He sighs, shaking his head. "This isn't just competition anymore. This is war." "Good." Meanwhile, across town, Alex leans back in a leather chair, laughing into a microphone. "Look, I get it. It's a nice story. But let's be real, if it were possible, it would have happened already. It's not about hard work. It's about biology." His co-host chuckles. "So if she wins?" He hesitates. For just a second. Then grins. "Then I'll eat my words." But that's not happening. Back in the gym, Maya grits her teeth, her muscles burning as she sprints the last stretch of the track. She refuses to stop. The world is watching. Maya's feet hit the track, each step a beat in her personal rhythm. Her breathing was sharp, her chest rising and falling with each breath she forced into her lungs. She ran with purpose, her muscles aching with the intensity of the workout, but she pushed herself harder. Every time her foot met the ground, she could hear Alex's voice in her head, taunting her. "If you can beat my record," the words echoed as if they were the only thing left in the world. She trained for this. Not just for the record, but for every moment of doubt that had ever been cast on her. Every word spoken to her in the past that had attempted to hold her back. This moment was not about just running the race. It was about proving that she belonged, no matter what anyone thought. Her coach, Luis, watched her from the sidelines. He had seen her push through before, seen her go the extra mile, but this was different. This was about something deeper than winning a race. It was about survival, about her will to stand tall in the face of those who doubted her because of her gender. She finished the lap, her breath ragged as she slowed to a jog. Sweat trickled down her forehead, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand. The track felt endless, and yet she knew she could not stop. Not yet. Luis called out to her, his voice cutting through the still air. "You're doing great, Maya, but you need to slow down a bit. You're pushing too hard." She shook her head, ignoring him. "I can't stop now. Not with everything on the line." Luis sighed, but he didn't push further. He knew this was bigger than just the physical challenge. He watched her, knowing the pressure she was under. She wasn't just fighting for a record. She was fighting for respect, fighting for every woman who had been told she couldn't. As Maya continued her workout, the world outside continued to react to the press conference. Alex's words lingered in the air, fueling the fire of those who didn't believe in her. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #MayaCanWin and #AlexCarterRetires trended, but so did those that mocked her. At user 5, Maya's heart is in the right place, but let's face it, her body isn't. It's just biology, folks. At user 6, good luck with that. Women's athletics might be evolving, but the men are still leagues ahead. At user 7, this is going to be an epic fail. I'll be here when she crashes and burns. The criticism flooded in, but Maya didn't look at it. Instead, she focused on the concrete reality in front of her, the track, the finish line, the goal. The next few weeks were a blur of grueling workouts, media appearances, and sponsorship deals. Maya found herself more and more in the spotlight, and the pressure mounted. Every time she woke up, the world seemed to expect something from her. But she kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other. It was a Friday morning when she had her next press appearance. The sports network had invited her for an interview, and she knew it was another chance to address Alex's challenge. She stood in front of the camera, dressed in her team colors, her eyes clear and focused. The host, a seasoned interviewer named Alan, greeted her with a smile. "Thanks for coming, Maya. It's been quite a ride since that press conference, hasn't it?" Maya gave a small nod, acknowledging the weight of the question. "It's been intense, to say the least. But I'm focused on what I need to do, and that's competing at my highest level." Alan leaned forward, the interest clear in his eyes. "Of course. But let's be real for a moment. Alex's challenge is out there, and the world is watching. Do you feel the pressure?" Maya paused for a moment, letting the question sink in. Pressure is a part of the game. I've faced it my whole life. People have doubted me for a long time. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to compete, and I'm here to win. Not for Alex, not for anyone but myself. The words came out smoother than she had anticipated. There was a calm confidence in her voice, one that would leave anyone who doubted her second-guessing their assumptions. She was ready for this. Back in Alex's world, the talk was all about Maya's rise. He appeared on his usual talk show, smug as ever, commenting on her training videos and the latest headlines. His grin never wavered as he sat across from his co-host, a retired football star named David. "Let's talk about Maya, then," David said, leaning in. "I'll admit she's got guts. But do you really think she can break your record?" Alex chuckled, taking a sip of water. "I admire her spirit, I do. But let's not kid ourselves. She's out of her depth here. Breaking my record isn't about just having heart. It's about physicality. The kind of strength that takes years of training with the best." David looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "So you're telling me you think she's wasting her time?" "Not wasting her time," Alex replied, leaning back in his chair. "But let's be clear, when it comes to the big leagues, men have the advantage. That's just science." The camera cut to David, who gave a small, knowing smile, as if the situation was already decided. The conversation moved on, but Alex's words continued to reverberate in the air. Maya was back in the gym the next day, her hands gripping the barbell with a white-knuckled intensity. Her body was starting to feel the strain, her muscles protesting with each lift, each movement, but she refused to acknowledge the fatigue. Luis stood by, arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Take a break," he said, his voice quiet but firm. She shook her head, her eyes fixed on the weights in front of her. "I'm fine." "Maya," Luis began, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're not just racing against Alex's record. You're racing against everything people think you can't do. But you're still human. You need rest." She set the barbell down with a thud, breathing heavily. "Not until I've proven him wrong," Maya muttered, wiping the sweat off her forehead. "Not until everyone who doubted me knows exactly what I'm capable of." Luis didn't press further. He knew this was her fight now, one that no coach could win for her. The days flew by, and the championship event grew closer. The pressure was palpable. As Maya readied herself for the final push, Alex continued to broadcast his opinions across every channel. His words were everywhere, with every passing interview and media appearance reinforcing the same narrative. But Maya didn't listen. Instead, she focused on her goal, the finish line just ahead of her. The record, the challenge, Alex's smirk, all of it began to fade into the background as she thought of one thing: the race. She knew what she had to do, and she wasn't going to stop until she did it. Maya woke up early the morning of the competition, long before the sun had risen. The stillness in the air felt like a cocoon, a temporary pause before the chaos of the day ahead. Her alarm clock beeped, pulling her from a restless sleep. She had barely managed to get a few hours in. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the track, the finish line, the tension building. But she couldn't afford to dwell on nerves now. She had to keep moving, keep focused. The smell of coffee filled the small kitchen as she prepared her usual breakfast, a mix of protein and carbs. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, but her hands didn't shake as she prepared the meal. Every motion was purposeful, every step deliberate. There was no room for hesitation today. No room for doubt. She glanced at the clock on the wall. The competition was hours away, but she could already feel the buzz building outside. News outlets were covering the event relentlessly. Interviews with her, with Alex, with the coaches, everyone had an opinion, everyone had something to say. But no one understood what it was like to stand where she stood, to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. No one but her. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A quick glance at the screen confirmed her suspicions. Social media was exploding once again. Another round of comments about her chances, Alex's latest interview, the constant debate about whether or not women's athletics would ever truly measure up to men's. She ignored it. The words no longer mattered. The day wore on in a blur of activity. Her coach Luis checked in, offering quiet words of encouragement as they made their way to the stadium. Maya remained focused, her thoughts sharp and clear. This wasn't about the noise. It wasn't about the criticism or the doubters. It was about the race. When they arrived at the stadium, the energy was electric. Fans gathered in the stands, some wearing shirts with Maya's face, others with Alex's. The rivalry was now the stuff of legend. Cameras were everywhere, snapping photos of athletes as they made their way to the locker rooms. Maya's stomach fluttered, but she held it together. This was what she had trained for. Inside the locker room, the team was gearing up. Maya was dressed in her race gear, her muscles already loosening up as she stretched. She could hear the low hum of the conversations around her, the team's chatter, the coaches preparing the final details. It was all a blur, a backdrop to the moment she knew was coming. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her sister, Lila. Maya couldn't help but smile as she read it. "Lila, you've got this, sis. Just remember, you're not just running for you. You're running for all of us. We believe in you." The words resonated deep within her. Maya had always run for herself, but now, with everything on the line, it was bigger than just her. She was running for every woman who had ever been told they couldn't do something. For every girl who had been told to sit down, to be quiet, to stay in the background. She was running for them all. She put her phone away and stood up. Her legs were strong, her body ready, her mind locked in. Everything else faded into the background. She didn't need the world's approval. She didn't need Alex's respect. She just needed to run. Outside, the stadium was buzzing. Fans filled the stands, the excitement palpable as the time for the race drew nearer. Alex had arrived earlier, walking through the crowd with his usual swagger, soaking in the attention. He had made a career out of making bold statements, but this challenge was different. He knew that if Maya broke his record, it would be more than just a personal loss. It would be a public humiliation. And Alex wasn't sure if he was ready for that. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the warm-up sessions, his eyes scanning the runners, waiting for Maya to arrive. She walked onto the track moments later, her face determined, her posture confident. She barely glanced at Alex, keeping her focus on the task ahead. He couldn't help but sneer inwardly. "She doesn't stand a chance," he muttered to himself. The announcer's voice echoed through the stadium, and the runners began to line up at the starting blocks. Maya's heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. She could hear the crowd now, their cheers and shouts rising into the air. This was it. This was the moment. The gunshot rang out, and the athletes shot forward, their bodies a blur of speed and power. Maya felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, her body springing into motion as her legs carried her down the track. Her eyes were locked on the finish line ahead, the line that represented everything she had worked for. But there was something else. Something in her peripheral vision. She could see Alex, his face twisted in concentration, watching her every move. She refused to look at him, focusing entirely on the race. She knew what she had to do. The first 100 meters flew by in an instant. Maya's form was perfect, her strides long and powerful. She was fast, faster than she had ever been in practice. She could feel the energy of the crowd pushing her forward, but she knew the real challenge was yet to come. This wasn't just about running fast, it was about maintaining that speed, about pacing herself for the entire distance. The midway point was always the hardest. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed for rest, but she fought through it. She wasn't just fighting her body, she was fighting every doubt that had ever been cast her way. Every insult, every joke, every moment when someone had looked at her and said, "You can't do this." She reached the final stretch, and the crowd's roar grew louder. Her chest heaved with each breath, but her body responded, pushing through the fatigue. Her eyes locked on the finish line. This was the moment of truth. This was everything. Her body surged forward, each step a desperate plea for victory. She felt a burst of energy deep within, the kind of strength only desperation could bring. Her limbs moved with perfect precision, every muscle honed and ready. The finish line approached faster than she could think, but she knew this was her time. With one final push, she crossed the line. The world went silent for a split second. Then, the crowd erupted. Maya stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down her face, as the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. A new record. The words sent shockwaves through the crowd. Her legs buckled slightly, but she caught herself, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. She had done it. She had broken Alex's record. She had proven the world wrong. She turned to look at Alex, who was standing at the edge of the track, his jaw dropped in disbelief. The smug grin he had worn only hours ago was now gone. His face was pale, his eyes wide in shock. Maya's lips curled into a faint smile, but she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The roar of the crowd was deafening, but Maya barely heard it. Her heart raced, not just from the physical exertion but from the overwhelming rush of emotions that swept through her. She had done it. She had broken Alex's record. In that moment, it wasn't just about the race. It was about everything that led to it. The countless hours of training, the late nights, the doubts, and the relentless pressure she had faced from Alex and the world. Now, it was all worth it. She stood there, catching her breath, her legs wobbling as the adrenaline surged through her veins. The loudspeakers blared the announcement. A new record. Maya Torres has just shattered the previous mark. The words sent shockwaves through the stadium. The energy shifted. Fans cheered, some jumping to their feet, others crying out in disbelief. Maya's victory had done more than just topple a record. It had toppled the narrative that had been building around her, the idea that she could never truly succeed in a man's world. But as the cheers rang out, Maya's gaze fell on Alex. He stood at the edge of the track, his face ashen, his eyes wide in stunned disbelief. He hadn't moved. He hadn't even clapped. His jaw hung open, the smug confidence from earlier completely gone. Maya didn't say a word. There was no need to. She had already said everything she needed to say by breaking the record, by proving him wrong. The cameras zoomed in on her, capturing the moment, but Maya's attention was solely on Alex. He had made his bet. He had publicly mocked her. Now, it was his turn to face the consequences. Alex took a hesitant step toward the track, as if unsure how to react. His mouth opened, then closed, as if he were struggling to find the words. But nothing came out. The announcer, seeing the tension between the two, filled the silence with his booming voice. What a moment, folks. Maya Torres has just made history today, and the world is watching. Alex Carter, I'm sure you have something to say to our record-breaking champion. The crowd fell silent, waiting for Alex to speak. The eyes of the world were on him now. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, his pride hanging by a thread. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to speak. "Alex, I don't know what to say." His voice was strained, a far cry from the confident tone he had used just hours ago. "I didn't think this would happen. Maya, you've proven me wrong." The words hung in the air, but they felt empty. Maya could hear the hesitation, the unwillingness to truly admit defeat. His tone was more reluctant than respectful, more grudging than genuine. But it didn't matter. She had won. Back in the locker room, the atmosphere was electric. Her teammates surrounded her, cheering and hugging her in celebration. Maya was still catching her breath, the reality of her victory sinking in. But even as the excitement swirled around her, she knew there was more to come. This moment was only the beginning. The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her back to reality. She grabbed it, seeing a flood of messages. From her family, from fans, and from the media. "Lila, I'm so proud of you, Maya. You did it. You've shown the world what we already knew." At user 3, "She did it. This is what true strength looks like." At user 6, "Take that, Alex. Women's athletics just entered a new era." At user 7, "Alex Carter can't talk anymore." Maya Torres just silenced the whole world. The flood of support was overwhelming, but Maya felt a quiet smile tug at her lips. This victory wasn't just about her. It was for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't good enough. It was for every girl who had ever been underestimated. She stepped out of the locker room, her team by her side, but there was one thing on her mind: Alex. Alex was still standing at the edge of the track when Maya walked past him, her head held high. He didn't move, didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. The cameras were still rolling, but the look in his eyes was all the answer Maya needed. The public had seen the humiliation in real time, but the true consequences were still to come. Later that night, the news outlets were buzzing. Clips of Maya's victory were replayed over and over. Headlines flashed across screens. Maya Torres shatters Alex Carter's record. A historic win for women in sports. Alex Carter's bet backfires. But the media wasn't the only thing that was alive with talk. Social media had exploded, and the reactions were coming in fast. At user 8, "This is the kind of change we need. Women are just as strong, just as capable." Maya proved it. At user 9, "I hope Alex learned something today. Humility is a hard lesson, but it's a necessary one." But it wasn't just fans and followers who were speaking out. Alex's former colleagues were starting to chime in as well. CO host, "I've known Alex for years, but even I didn't think he'd take such a hit. Maya just shattered that record. And I have to say, I'm impressed. She's proven herself, and I think the world owes her an apology." The words felt like a slap to Alex's face. He sat in his studio, his hands clenched in fists at his sides, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Maya had done the impossible, and he had been proven wrong. The phone rang and he almost didn't answer, but he knew who it was. Captain Bennett, his boss. "Alex, we need to talk." His stomach sank. The next morning, Alex stood before a small group of executives at his network's headquarters. The conference room was sterile, the tension palpable as the suits filed in and took their seats. He had never felt so small, so vulnerable. "Executive 1, Alex, we've had discussions with the board. You're a great commentator, but we can't ignore the damage that this has done to our reputation. This wasn't just a challenge gone wrong. This was a public display of, well, let's be honest here, misogyny. We're not sure we can continue with your role here." Alex opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. He had always prided himself on his unshakable confidence, on being the voice that people turned to. But now, in the face of this fallout, it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. "Executive 2, we'll be reviewing the situation, but for now, we're placing you on leave. We need to assess the public response and make a decision about the future of your position." Back at the stadium, Maya was receiving praise from every direction. Coaches, athletes, fans, and even Alex's former colleagues were praising her for her performance. The world had shifted, and Maya had become the face of a movement. But even in the midst of all the applause, Maya knew the fight was far from over. This was just the first battle in a war that had been going on for far too long. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from Alex's former co-commentator. "CEO host, you did it, Maya. You not only broke the record, but you also broke a lot of stereotypes. Respect." Maya smiled, typing a quick reply. "Maya, thanks. It's not just about the record. It's about changing the narrative. I hope this is just the beginning." She paused before hitting send, reflecting on how far she had come. The morning after the race, Maya woke up to an explosion of messages. Her phone screen was flooded with notifications, congratulations, praise, and media requests. She had broken Alex's record, something few had believed possible. She had achieved more than personal glory. She had made a statement, not only about her own abilities but about the power of women in sports. She set the phone aside for a moment and took a deep breath. This wasn't just a race. This was her life's work, her dream realized. But the world around her hadn't slowed down. The moment she had fought for was now being scrutinized by millions. And with all the admiration came a darker side: criticism, envy, and the relentless pressure of being in the public eye. Still, the spotlight felt warm in a way it never had before. She could hear the soft hum of reporters and cameras outside her hotel room, waiting for her next move. They wanted an interview, a comment, a moment with her. It was surreal, but there was no time to waste. Maya took a few minutes to center herself before she pulled on her tracksuit, mentally preparing for another wave of media attention. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. This was her moment, but it would only last as long as she made it. The world had finally recognized her, but she knew that if she didn't keep proving herself, it would all slip away. Back at the media headquarters, Alex was pacing in his office, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't organize. His career, once a solid and predictable trajectory, now seemed uncertain. Maya's victory had turned everything upside down. He had bet his career on her failure, and the world had witnessed his defeat. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had mocked her, underestimated her, and now he was the one left in the dust. His co-host, David, stepped into the office, his face grim. He had been trying to reach Alex for hours, but he hadn't been answering his calls. "Alex," David began, his voice low, "you need to see this." He handed him his phone. On the screen was a video of Maya crossing the finish line, followed by her calm, confident expression. The clip had gone viral, shared by athletes, fans, even celebrities. David paused, clearly uncomfortable. "You know what they're saying about her breaking the record. About you. You're not just trending for the wrong reasons. You're being called out." Hard. Alex sat down slowly, his mind still reeling. "I didn't think she could do it," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "She's just not built for this. The gap is too wide. It always has been." David shook his head. "Alex, that kind of thinking, it's what got you here. You can't keep making excuses. Maya didn't just beat your record, she embarrassed you. And now, the whole world is watching." Alex slammed his fist on the desk. "She didn't just embarrass me, David. She humiliated me. She's getting praise for something that was never supposed to happen. They're all acting like I was wrong about her, wrong about women in sports. Like everything I've said for years was just nonsense." David looked at him, his expression softening, but his voice firm. "Maybe it was. Maybe you were wrong. You need to figure out how to handle this, Alex. If you want to keep your career, you need to take responsibility. Own up to it, apologize. You can't keep pretending like you didn't make a fool of yourself in front of everyone." Alex was silent for a long time. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, but he wasn't sure where to start. How could he fix something so broken? How could he apologize for the things he'd said, the things he truly believed until yesterday? "I'll fix it," he muttered finally, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Later that day, the announcement came. Alex Carter was placed on indefinite leave by the network. His actions, his words, the arrogance that had defined his career, had all come crashing down. The public had spoken, and the executives had made their decision. The network needed to protect its reputation, and that meant parting ways with Alex. For the first time in years, Alex was left alone in the silence of his own office. He stared at the empty desk, at the stacks of papers that no longer mattered. His career had been built on his voice, on his ability to shape narratives, but now he had no words. Maya, on the other hand, was already moving forward. The victory was still fresh, but she was already focused on what came next. Her coach, Luis, had warned her about this moment. The flood of attention, the expectations, the people who would try to use her for their own gain. But Maya had always known this was part of the journey. She had to stay grounded, keep her eyes on the prize. She sat down with reporters one by one, each asking the same questions, but each one hoping for a different answer. How did it feel to break Alex's record? How did it feel to prove the critics wrong? What would she say to all the people who doubted her? She answered them all the same way, gracefully, confidently, but with a quiet humility. I didn't do this for anyone else. I did it because I believed in myself. I've been underestimated my whole life. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. The next few days were a blur of appearances, interviews, and media frenzy. Maya kept a calm demeanor, but inside, she was bubbling with excitement. The world had seen her. She had proven herself not just to the world but to herself. It wasn't just about breaking a record, it was about breaking barriers. She had made history, and she knew she would continue to do so. As the days passed, Alex's reputation continued to crumble. His apology was met with skepticism, his attempts to regain his position rejected. The public had moved on. They had already found a new champion, Maya Torres, the athlete who had defied the odds. A few weeks later, Maya found herself back on the track, training for the next big challenge. But this time, there was something different in the air. There was a quiet confidence that she hadn't had before. She knew she had nothing to prove anymore. The world had seen her. The world knew her name. But now, it wasn't just about being known, it was about what she would do next. Luis watched her as she finished her laps, her stride strong, her form perfect. He smiled to himself, proud of the woman she had become. "You've come a long way, Maya," he said, his voice low but full of admiration. Maya slowed down, wiping the sweat from her brow. "There's still a long way to go, coach." She paused, looking ahead at the empty track. "But I'm ready." Luis nodded. "I know you are." As the sun set over the stadium, Maya stood there, watching the last rays of light dance across the track. The world had watched her rise, but this was only the beginning. She wasn't just a record breaker. She was a trailblazer. And nothing was going to stop her now. Maya spent the following weeks in a whirlwind of training and media appearances. The world had finally seen her for what she was, an athlete with the heart and talent to back up her ambition. But despite the whirlwind of attention, her mind remained focused on the track, her next race, the next challenge. The victory over Alex's record was just the first step. She knew better than anyone that success was fleeting if you didn't keep pushing. The days blended together in a routine that had become second nature to her. Morning runs, weight training, intense drills, and quiet evenings spent with her team. Maya didn't let the fame change her. She was still the same woman who had trained in small gyms, faced ridicule, and been dismissed by those who couldn't see past their own biases. But now, she was part of a larger conversation. She had become a symbol of resilience, of breaking through barriers, not just in sports but in every field where women were told they couldn't reach the top. But as the world celebrated her success, she couldn't forget that it had come at a cost. Alex's downfall was hard to ignore. She hadn't wanted to humiliate him, hadn't wanted to see his career unravel. All she had ever wanted was to prove to herself, and to the world, that she belonged at the top. She had heard the whispers, seen the headlines. Alex had tried to apologize, had gone on several interviews where he admitted his wrongs, but the damage was done. His apology had come too late. The world had already moved on. People were tired of his arrogance, tired of his outdated views on women's sports. He had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with an industry that still didn't know how to truly support women at the highest levels. Despite everything, Maya didn't relish his downfall. There was no satisfaction in seeing him suffer. She had always believed that true success didn't come at the expense of others. It was about lifting everyone up, breaking down barriers so that the next generation of athletes, of women, could walk through doors that had once been closed to them. The media frenzy continued for days, with interviews, social media posts, and news reports all focused on the aftermath of her record-breaking performance. Maya's victory had been replayed countless times on sports networks, and the public had latched onto her story with a fervor that felt both exhilarating and overwhelming. Fans reached out with words of support, celebrities tweeted their congratulations, and even athletes from other sports sent messages of praise. But amid all the praise, there was a sense of quiet reflection for Maya. This was more than just a win, it was a turning point. It was a statement that her success wasn't a fluke, that women could compete at the highest level, and that their stories were worthy of being told. For years, the narrative around women in sports had been that they were secondary to the men, that their victories were somehow less significant. Maya had shattered that perception. She had proven that the narrative had been wrong all along. But with every victory came a new challenge. The questions she had faced about her talent and her potential didn't stop with the record-breaking moment. Now, the world wanted more. She could feel the weight of the expectations pressing down on her. What would she do next? How could she follow up such a monumental win? What if her next race didn't live up to the hype? Maya sat in her hotel room late that night, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Another round of congratulatory messages. A few media requests for interviews, and then a few that made her smile. There was a text from her younger sister, Lila. "Lila, you've done it, Maya. You showed them all. You're more than just a record breaker, you're a change maker. We're so proud of you. I knew you could do it." Maya smiled softly as she read the message. Lila had always believed in her, even when the world didn't. She could hear her sister's voice in her mind, encouraging her to keep going, to keep pushing forward. For Lila, Maya's victory was more than just a win. It was a sign that the world was starting to change, that it was no longer okay to ignore the voices of women in the arena. She typed a quick response. "Maya, thanks, Lila. This isn't just about me. This is for all the girls who were told they couldn't. We're all in this together." Maya put her phone down and leaned back in the chair, staring out at the skyline. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but her thoughts were miles away. She had proven herself, but now she had to keep proving it, day after day, race after race. The next challenge was always on the horizon. But for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with herself. She had done what no one thought possible. And now, she could keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Alex's world was falling apart. His social media was flooded with comments, most of them mocking him, criticizing his outdated views, and pointing out his inability to take responsibility. His former colleagues had distanced themselves, refusing to defend him. The network had placed him on indefinite leave, a polite way of saying that his career was over. Alex had been a prominent figure in sports commentary for years, but now, it seemed like no one wanted to hear his voice anymore. He spent his days in solitude, pacing around his apartment, staring at the walls. His mind replayed the events of the past few weeks over and over, like a broken record. He had underestimated Maya, had mocked her publicly, and now he was paying the price. It wasn't just the record he had lost. It was his credibility, his reputation, everything he had built. He had tried to apologize, to make amends, but it felt hollow. The words didn't seem to carry the weight he needed them to. People had already made up their minds. Maya had done what they never thought possible. And now, Alex was the one left in the dust. He could feel the public turning against him, could see his career slipping through his fingers like sand. A few weeks later, Maya's next race arrived. It wasn't the World Championships, but it was another opportunity to prove herself. As she stood at the starting line, her thoughts focused, her body primed for the challenge, she knew this race was different. It wasn't about breaking a record this time. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about pushing herself to be better, to continue growing. The gunshot echoed in the air, and Maya was off, her body moving with the familiar rhythm of the track beneath her. She focused on her breathing, on the way her legs carried her, on the feeling of the wind against her skin. She wasn't thinking about the race itself anymore. She was thinking about what came after. The race ended in a blur, but Maya crossed the finish line with a sense of accomplishment. She had won, but this time, it felt like something more. The victory was sweet, but it wasn't about the result. It was about the journey, about the growth, the lessons learned, the barriers broken. As she walked off the track, the reporters gathered around her, eager for the next soundbite, the next headline. But this time, Maya had no more words to prove. She had already said everything she needed to. As Maya walked off the track, her mind was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. Reporters shouted questions, microphones were shoved in her direction, but she remained composed, walking with a quiet determination. This was different from her last race. There were no record-breaking moments to discuss, no dramatic victories to recount. This time, the race was hers simply because she had done what she set out to do. She had given her best. And that was enough. She felt a quiet sense of pride in her chest, but also a deep satisfaction. She wasn't just running against others. She was running against the expectations that had been set for her, the ones others had placed on her before they even knew who she was. Now, she was running for herself, for the future she wanted to shape. As the reporters circled her, trying to get a soundbite, Maya spoke calmly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had nothing left to prove. "I'm happy with my performance, but every race is a chance to get better. The world doesn't stop moving and neither do I." She smiled slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd, then turned back to the microphone. "It's not about proving others wrong anymore. It's about proving to myself that I can keep improving. That's what matters." The media was quick to pick up on her humility, her poise. There was no boastful talk of shattered records or challenges faced. There was only the quiet power of a woman who had earned her place and was now determined to hold it. The world had seen her potential, and Maya wasn't going to let them forget it. Meanwhile, Alex sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his former life. His phone was buzzing with notifications, but he didn't bother to check them. The world had moved on without him. He had been a commentator for years, a voice that shaped the opinions of millions, and now he was just another failed celebrity in the world of sports. He knew his career was over. The network had made it clear. He had been placed on indefinite leave, a polite way of saying, "Don't bother coming back." The apology he had given after Maya's victory had been met with skepticism, the damage to his reputation irreparable. People weren't buying it. They weren't buying him anymore. Alex tried to shake the feeling of defeat, but it lingered, weighing him down. He was no longer the man he had once been. His words had been weapons used to tear down others. But now, those weapons had turned on him, and he was left to face the consequences. He thought about Maya, about her quiet confidence, her unshakable determination. She had been so composed in the face of his ridicule, so sure of herself. She had taken his words, his mockery, and turned them into motivation. She had risen above it all. And he had fallen. He had gambled with his career, and now, the stakes had cost him everything. Alex ran a hand through his hair, staring at the television, which was replaying highlights of Maya's victory. She was everywhere now. The cameras loved her. The fans adored her. She was the new face of athletics, the symbol of what women could achieve when given the chance. And he was the man who had doubted her every step of the way. Despite the quiet storm brewing in Alex's mind, Maya was already planning ahead. She had known the path would not be easy. She had known that her success would always be measured against something or someone. But she was prepared for that. She had been fighting all her life for this moment, and now that she had it, she wasn't about to let it slip away. Luis had been by her side every step of the way, and he was more than just a coach. He was the one who had believed in her when no one else did. He had pushed her, driven her, and helped her navigate the complexities of fame and competition. But even he knew that her journey wasn't over yet. There would be more races, more tests, more scrutiny. But that was part of the process. Maya had accepted that. She looked over at him as she walked back into the locker room after her race. He was standing at the entrance, arms crossed, watching her with a knowing smile. "You did great," he said simply. Maya nodded, her expression focused. "I'm not done yet, coach. Not even close." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He had seen the fire in her, the drive that pushed her beyond any finish line. I know you're not. But remember, it's not just about winning. It's about staying true to who you are, no matter what. Maya smiled faintly, a spark of determination in her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Luis. I'm just getting started. Back at the sports network, the executives were holding a meeting, the atmosphere tense and uneasy. Alex's career, once a shining example of what sports commentary could be, was now a liability. The board members discussed their options, some arguing that Alex should be given another chance, while others were firm in their stance. He had crossed a line, and the damage was done. Executive 1, we've had some backlash, sure. But he's been with us for years. Can we just throw all of that away because of one mistake? Executive 2, it's not just one mistake. It's a pattern. His comments were harmful, and the public won't let him forget them. We can't afford to keep him on if it means losing credibility. There was a pause, the room heavy with the weight of their decisions. The future of the network was at stake. How could they continue to promote someone who had so openly disrespected women's sports? How could they rebuild trust with their audience? Executive 3, we've seen the numbers. Maya Torres has been a hit. She's been getting more attention, more sponsors. And she's not just the future of women's athletics, she's the future of the network. Alex had seen the writing on the wall for days. He was no fool. The conversation was a formality. He had made his bed and now it was time to lie in it. His phone rang and he glanced at the screen. It was the executive team. He answered reluctantly. Alex, I know what this is about. Executive 1, Alex, we've decided to let you go. We're taking a new direction, and we can't afford to have you represent the network anymore. We'll handle the formalities, but we think it's best if you step away for good. There was a long silence. Alex didn't know what to say. Everything he had worked for was crumbling in an instant. He had built a career on arrogance and defiance, and now that very same arrogance had led to his downfall. Days passed, and Alex's isolation grew. He stayed holed up in his apartment, the TV muted, the phone silent. The world had moved on without him. Maya Torres had become the voice of the new generation, and he had become a cautionary tale. The weight of his past mistakes crushed him, and all he could do was watch from the sidelines as the world continued to celebrate Maya's success. Meanwhile, Maya's schedule was becoming more demanding. Interviews, races, sponsorships. Her life was now a constant balancing act between her personal goals and the public's expectations. She had reached the top, but now, staying there was the real challenge. She knew the pressure would only increase, but she was ready for it. She thought back to the days when she had first started racing, when the world hadn't yet noticed her. She thought about the naysayers, the people who had told her that she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't strong enough. They were wrong. She had proven them all wrong. And now, with every step forward, she was going to prove that she belonged.